Hello, welcome to the GPP Chen Music Podcast. I'm Big Italy 42. He's Scott Mailwig at Sports 25 to Life. We're talking about Friday's slate, of course, FanDuel, DraftKings, and of course, lots of big arms on the slate, as there have been pretty much every Friday all season long. Big debate tonight's going to be Clayton Kershaw versus Felix Hernandez. You and I talk about it every time this happens. Seems like they always pitch on the same day, and both guys with good matchups. Obviously, San Diego's lineup, top to bottom, I'd say more talent than Houston's lineup, but much better pitcher's park. Kershaw, a bigger favorite. Houston with power, but they also strike out a ton. Take your pick here. Pretty close on FanDuel. I don't think you can go wrong with either one. I slightly prefer Kershaw, but on DraftKings, where you have a $1,500 difference, I think that if you can only have one, you might as well just save your $1,500 and get Felix Hernandez, and then save the money to pay up for some bats tonight.
Yeah, that's the place where I think it's really tempting to take Felix. Our projections on Daily Fantasy Cafe today have them really similar.
Yeah.
It's going to be tough on FanDuel where it feels like you have to take one of them. But I know you like one guy a little bit further down. I like another guy, so we'll get to those guys at some point. But sticking with these top two, I think Kershaw is the safer play. You mentioned we were talking before the podcast that Houston has a lot of power. San Diego's got nothing right now. I mean, they made so many improvements in their lineup in the offseason, and they've just been really struggling over the last 3 weeks. I wrote the pitcher breakdown today, and over the last 3 weeks, their WOBA overall against all pitchers is like 286 or 287 or something like that. They just haven't been very good. They've been struggling with some injuries and some replacements in the lineup and stuff like that. I mean, it's the best pitcher's ballpark. Kershaw's just set up to throw an absolutely fantastic game today.
Yep.
As far as Houston goes, we know they strike out probably the most in the league right now. They're right up there with the Cubs over the entire season. Baltimore is getting up there over the last couple weeks or so, but they're striking out a ton. We've seen some terrible pitchers strike out 10 guys against Houston. We've talked about it quite a bit over the last couple weeks. I think Hernandez could easily have a 15 strikeout game in this one. He's got to dodge a lot more power bats than Kershaw does, is the only thing there. So I'm looking at Felix as more of the GPP play. I think he'll be a little bit less owned on both sites. I think Kershaw's the cash game play, though. I saw minus 240 favorite earlier. I think he's come down a little bit to about minus 220 right now or so. Both of those are huge numbers. I think Kershaw's the cash game play for me, where I'm going to be looking at Felix more as the GPP play, I think.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Like you mentioned, minus 220, 6-run total, by far the lowest on the night. Not even close. Felix Hernandez is opened at a 163 favorite, now minus 131, 7.5-run total. A little bit surprising there. I'm not sure exactly what's happening there. Maybe Nelson Cruz is going to sit out and someone knows something that we don't. Either way, you like to think they're going to get some run support either way. This is a Seattle team that got crushed by Sean Markham yesterday, but batted around on Corey Kluber and Trevor Bauer the days before that. So, certainly shouldn't have a whole lot of trouble with Brett Oberholzer tonight. I'm with you there. I think that Felix more the tournament option, but I don't think that Kershaw is a bad tournament option either. Because if he puts out a vintage Kershaw performance and he goes 8 innings, 12, 13 Ks, something like that, you're going to be hard pressed catching up to that in some other spots with some of these other pitchers.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of the other ones I like is GPP plays. My personal favorite is Johnny Cueto against a Cubs team that's striking out a ton. He has a lot of the same issues that we're talking about with Felix Hernandez, where the Cubs have a pretty good offense. They just strike out a ton. But Cueto's been so good lately that I feel pretty confident in him. He's come back from that injury and looked like he didn't sit out at all, frankly. He's had a couple nice strikeout games and has been in really good shape.
Yeah. So, obviously there's a big strikeout upside there. You got to like that. There's certainly some other big arms on the mound as well. A guy that I'm seriously considering here, and this isn't chasing his huge game against this same team a couple weeks back, but Michael Pineda, $8,900 on DraftKings, $98 on FanDuel. We talk about the big strikeout upside with Houston, but you already mentioned how Baltimore is really starting to struggle. Now they're up there at fourth highest in the league over the season, 23.2% against righties. And then you look at what's been happening in the last 14 days, they're striking out 25.2% of the time. So this is a team that's very, very beatable. You're certainly not chasing the huge game that he had last time, but I mean, this is a team that's been swinging and missing a lot against everyone not named Wade Miley. So, I mean, there's definitely some big-time upside here, and especially in tournaments, I think that $2,000 could get an extra big bat in your lineups and kind of set you apart tonight.
Yeah, definitely. And the people around him in price aren't anything special today is the big thing for him. I think he's the clear-cut option in that price range. Jason Hamill, another guy in that early Cubs-Reds game, is a guy in that price range that I greatly prefer Pineda to if you're playing that early slate. Danny Salazar is facing Detroit today. I don't like that. So he's kind of the clear-cut option there in terms of GPP plays if you end up in that price range, which that's a lot of what happens when I'm creating GPP teams is I'll build my hitting lineup first and then come back and try and slot in pitchers and then work from there because you end up with a lot of the same teams if you just start building with pitchers sometimes because you're selecting one or two of them for most of these sites here. And if you go in and you just put Kershaw and Pineda in there or whatever, then you're really limiting your hitting options and you end up with a lot of the same hitters and it's hard to diversify your lineups where if you go in and build your hitters and you end up with a certain amount, you can kind of mix and match your pitchers to fit that lineup and then maybe make an adjustment to one or two of your hitters you feel comfortable downgrading or upgrading or whatever based on what you end up with pitcher. Yeah. So I really like that approach, and I think Pineda is going to end up in a lot of my lineups because of that, because he's really the only guy in that price range that I like very much. The next guy down that I wrote up today was Jordan Zimmerman against Milwaukee, who doesn't have nearly the upside Pineda does against Baltimore today. Zimmerman's been a lot better over the last 8 games. He's gone 7+ innings in 5 of them. He just doesn't have that big strikeout rate. Milwaukee's not a terrible strikeout team, but they're not a great one either. They're sitting right around 22% right now in terms of strikeout rate. So I think he has some decent upside today. Nothing like massive where he's going to go and strike out 12 guys, but I feel like he's a decent option too.
Yeah, and I feel like with Zimmerman, you're paying for efficiency, like you said, rather than upside. He's a guy that could pitch you 7-8 solid innings, and he doesn't need to get you 8 to 10 strikeouts and to give you a nice start in. Going back to that strategy for a second, I think that's a really underused strategy. That's something I do a lot as well. And, when you can go with your pitchers last, make your list of your guys at each position, fill in your lineups if you're going to do stacks, whatever you're going to do, and then see who fits that way because I've had that problem before when I first started DFS. You look at a night like tonight, you're like, okay, what lineups can I build with these pitchers? And I think that's the wrong way to go sometimes. So that's certainly a good way to approach it. David Price is an interesting option tonight for GPPs, of course. $10,900 on FanDuel. He's $10,700 on DraftKings, and we've seen some good, we've seen some bad out of Price. As a whole this season, he's not putting up the numbers that we're accustomed to, but we've seen his big-time upside, 11 Ks in a complete game last time out against the White Sox, had 12 against Houston, had a real nice game against St. Louis. And, I mean, it seems like, and they're letting him throw a lot of pitches. I mean, he's been over 100 pitches in all but one game this year, and the only one it wasn't was that Yankees game where he got crushed. So he's got a long leash, which helps him pitch deep into games. It's a lefty-dominant lineup there, obviously, for Cleveland. So, the interesting thing with him is going to be if he can navigate the bats that actually hit lefties well. The guys like Michael Brantley, Yan Gomes is back now. He hits lefties pretty well. But you look at his numbers, and he's actually, as usual, been pretty damn good against lefties. 269 WOBA allowed, just one home run on the season. So, if you're looking for a swerve, I prefer him much, much more than a guy like Madison Bumgarner, who's got a really tough matchup against an Arizona team that kills left-handed pitching.
Yeah, I think both of those guys are really interesting GPP options today because, like you mentioned, they're both at high prices where, even Price, I really like that matchup too against a bunch of lefties, but for 600 more on DraftKings, you can get Felix. Price is up there on FanDuel too, where he's not quite as close to Felix and Kershaw on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings, at least Hernandez-wise on DraftKings, but that's a potential like GPP winning play right there, where he's going to be probably less than 10% owned on DraftKings, probably less than 5% on FanDuel, I would think. So you got to feel pretty good about that ownership percentage in GPPs. If you can get a bunch of teams in there with him on there and he goes off, the problem is I don't really see Kershaw failing today is the big issue in GPPs for me today is I don't see what – obviously you could end up with a random 3-run home run here or there and he could end up with a not elite day, but basically everything points to him pitching 8 innings and striking out probably 12, 13 guys and giving up maybe one run. I
Yep.
mean, he's got a great park factor today. He's facing a team that doesn't hit lefties really well or anyone really well. They strike out a decent amount. But like you mentioned, if Price can somehow outscore Kershaw, I mean, you could easily win a GPP with him on your roster.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just to further your Kershaw point, I got his numbers against these current Padres hitters: 128 at bats, 25 total hits, 7 extra base hits, 1 home run, 12 walks, 35 strikeouts. They're batting 195 off of him. So, like you said, little resistance for Kershaw tonight. But even a similar price tag, even if he doesn't outscore him, but comes close with those prices being so close, that's a better way to differentiate yourself than dipping down to one of these cheaper guys and saving a bunch of salary, because a lot of people are going to have that approach. It's the similar pricing that's going to set you apart.
Yeah, definitely. That's the big thing is, I mean, the pricing on the pitchers today is going to be really determinative of what pitchers are highly owned on which sites, because usually they're pretty like comparable and stuff. And today it's like there's a decent change between like FanDuel, DraftKings, Fantasy Feud, Draft Day. I mean, they're all like pretty spread out in terms of which pitcher is actually the best like value option today.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. And I'll throw out one more guy here that I don't actually like as a pitcher this year, but he's shown some big time upside in the past. Alex Wood against the Mets tonight. They're actually 11th in league in team WOBA against left-handed pitching, which you don't like. But what you do like for GPPs is the fact that they strike out 23.3% of the time, one of the highest rates in the league. And this is an Alex Wood that he's had his big ups, he's had his big downs. I mean, he's hasn't been great as far as strikeouts go this season. He had an 8, a 7, and a 6, but also a 1 strikeout game at Miami. But if this is the Mets team that's free swinging tonight and he pitches deep into this game, we've seen him with 10 to 12 strikeout upside in the past when he was healthy. So now that he's finally healthy again, I like him as a tournament option, more so on FanDuel where he's 7,800. 86 on DraftKings seems a little bit pricey for a guy he's very risky in this matchup, but he's certainly going to be very low owned and has some upside.
Yeah, definitely. I like that play quite a bit in that price range too. I mean, once you get out of these elite guys, there's only like one guy in each price range that you feel pretty good about. If we go down a little bit further, this guy's more of a cash game play, but I think he's probably going to be a little bit under-owned in GPPs because of all the top options. Jeff Locke is a huge favorite against Philly today. I think he was sitting there at near 180 last I looked, and I don't particularly love anything about it except that he's left-handed and facing a Philly team that just is absolutely terrible against lefties.
Yep.
Locke's not a guy I really am excited to run out there, really, but at 6,000 on DraftKings, he's, 6,900 on FanDuel.
Yep.
I mean, he's stupid cheap everywhere. I think he's going to be probably overplayed a little bit in cash games, honestly, because of his price, and people wanted to load up on some of these quality hitters that we're going to get to here. But I think he might be a little bit under-owned in GPPs, at least on FanDuel, I think. DraftKings, I think he'll probably get paired with one of the top guys, probably a little too often for my liking to really love him in GPPs.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'll throw out one more guy here, Yordano Ventura. Obviously, Matt Holliday not in that Cardinals lineup. That's a big loss for them. And like we know, this is a good Cardinals team, but there's not very many hitters individually that you see, like you have to navigate. Guys like Matt Carpenter obviously hit righties very well, but Colton Wong as well. But I mean, really outside with Matt Holliday out of that line, that's a big loss for them. Yordano Ventura at $8,400 on FanDuel, I think, is an interesting play. And he's only $7,600 on DraftKings. So we know when he's on, he's got big upside. He hasn't shown it a ton this season, but he had a 17-point game against Cincinnati a couple weeks ago. Had a big game, 7 strikeouts against the Angels, 8 strikeouts against the White Sox. So he has that upside. You just don't know that you expect it. So he might be more of a cash game play, but I think with Holiday out of the lineup, he's certainly in play for single bullets in some tournaments.
Yeah, definitely. I can't argue with that at all.
All right, let's go ahead and move past pitchers, because past that are all the guys we want to pick on. We'll end up getting to those guys here in a minute.
Yep.
So at catcher, I'm a big fan of Toronto bats tonight. DraftKings is as well, as expensive as they are.
Yeah.
Joe Kelly has monstrous reverse splits this season with right-handed hitters. I mean, he was never particularly good against right-handed hitters to begin with, but if you look at his numbers against righties this year, I mean, it's scary how bad he's been. 379 WOBA allowed, 25 runs and 26 in the third innings with 17 walks. I expect Toronto to be, I don't know if they'll be a popular stack necessarily. They'll be fairly popular. I don't know if they'll be the most popular, but going to be hard to fit him in on DraftKings, which I think will make their ownership really low. But I mean, a lot of these guys in good spots, and that's going to start with Russell Martin at catcher.
Yep, definitely. Honestly, he's far and away my favorite option at catcher today. There's quite a few tough matchups for the guys that I play a decent amount. Like Vogt is facing a lefty today. He might not even be in the lineup. I don't think he's had a day off in a while.
Yeah, I see Josh Fegley.
Yeah, right. There was another guy I saw that had a pretty tough match. Posey. I don't love Posey against Anderson today for 4,600. I'm going to go probably Martin 100% at that price point. Yep. Brian McCann's a guy I'll look at a little bit, although I don't love paying 4,100 for him on DraftKings. I'd rather look at him in the threes on FanDuel.
Yep.
But, I mean, lefties have really good numbers at Camden Yards. Jimenez is a guy that we've seen blow up a few times already this season. I think that whole Yankees offense is an interesting stack today with how many lefties they have in the lineup against Jimenez, who hasn't been very good against lefties in a park that is probably second only to Yankee Stadium in terms of lefty park factors. So I like that quite a bit.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, I think that's going to be a nice stack today. It's going to be fairly low owned because people still buying into the decent numbers by Ubaldo Jimenez, but his swing and strike rate among the lowest in the league. Just not been very good. And then a guy that I love to play in tournaments, GPPs, if you've been watching any of our shows, you know this. He has a 306 ISO and 405 WOBA against left-handed pitching this season. Robinson Chirinos, $2,600 on FanDuel, $3,700 on DraftKings. I love playing him in tournaments against, especially against a pitcher that I'll say he's average. I mean, Jimenez isn't a terrible pitcher, but you'll see him on some rosters tonight.
Yeah, definitely. He's an option too. There's not a lot to love there, but not a lot to love anywhere at catcher today.
Yep. Yeah. One more guy I'll throw out there, Yan Gomes. He is facing David Price, but he crushes lefties. $2,500 FanDuel and $3,300 DraftKings. I think he's the ultimate GPP play tonight against a tough pitcher. Moving on to first base, I think Miguel Cabrera is going to be a nice tournament option against Danny Salazar, who has way too high of a fly ball rate and home run rate this year, 1.31 per 9. Detroit's going to be another one of those stacks that goes on to run because Danny Salazar did pitch well against him last time. You know his huge strikeout rate, so you'll probably see quite a bit of him in tournaments. And Edwin Encarnacion, $4,100, especially at his FanDuel price, I really like tonight.
Yep, I like him quite a bit too.
Yeah. Paul Goldschmidt will also throw in. He does get Madison Bumgarner tonight, but anytime he's facing a lefty, he's in play. Very expensive, $5,600 on FanDuel. I don't know that I'll even get him in anything but a stack on there, but much, much more affordable on DraftKings at $4,700.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of first basemen I like today, honestly. Outside of Prince Fielder, who's got a tough lefty-lefty matchup with Malone today, I mean, there's a lot of guys out there. Like Freddie Freeman is red hot right now. He's 4,200 against a pretty average righty in Cologne. I like him quite a bit there for 4,200. Adrian Gonzalez is down to 3,900 against the Spain. Obviously, that's in San Diego, but he's played in San Diego a ton. I like him as a cash game play for 3,900. I think he's a decent GPP play too because he's going to be under-owned. He doesn't really have anything that sticks out at you other than his slightly low price tag. So I think he's going to be an under-owned first baseman today, especially with some of these other top options you've been mentioning.
Yeah, completely agree. And as usual, when he faces a lefty, I like to target him in tournaments. Darren Ruff, men's salary on FanDuel, $3,000 on DraftKings. DraftKings, he also has outfield eligibility, which is where I'll be playing him in tournaments. I'm not going to waste my my first base position on him when I have other options on DraftKings. All right, next up, second base. As always, another guy facing a lefty, murders lefties. Brian Dozier, much more affordable on FanDuel at $3,900, but on DraftKings, really pricey, and rightfully so at $5,300. So against Wandy Rodriguez, who hasn't been terrible this season, but I'm certainly not a believer in him. Gotta love him. I think D. Gordon, more of a cash game play on FanDuel because he's so cheap at $3,200 against Kyle Kendrick, who is just an absolute embarrassment against left-handed batters. Yep. 424 WOBA allowed. Also, Nick Hundley and Michael McKinnon, neither one of them good at throwing out runners on the base pass. So
good point.
If D. Gordon gets on, there's not a chance in hell they're stopping him on the base pass tonight.
Yep, that's a really good point. One guy that I like quite a bit on DraftKings at 4,100 is Anthony Rendon at both second base and third base. He's been ice cold since he came back, but Fears is a guy that makes a lot of mistakes, and Rendon, I feel pretty good about at that price as a GPP play. Not a guy you can touch in cash games, but we're talking GPPs here, and at 4,100, I think that's a steal compared to some of these other top second base options, and I have Rendon projected pretty highly today. I'd like to see him get it going a little bit first, but as a guy I'm going to use in maybe 10% of my GPPs, I feel pretty good about that play. There's a lot of other guys in that price range that you just almost can't play. Like Jose Altuve against Felix today is really tough. Jason Kipnis against the lefty in Price. As good as Kipnis has been, I don't want to play him against a tough lefty like that.
Yeah. Unless you're a BVP believer, and then you can play Altuve because he is 8 for 18 against Felix Hernandez. That's not me, but
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, not enough of a sample size for me, especially against that good of a pitcher. I mean, you'd need a massive sample size to convince me that I want to pay for him against Felix Hernandez.
There's not enough time in his career to get that big of a sample size.
Right, I need 50 at bats and him to be hitting at least 400 against him probably for me to consider that worthwhile. But
certainly,
somebody will play him, and he'll probably have a nice game for some reason.
Yeah, he'll get the one mistake that Felix makes, and then Felix will give up 2 hits to everyone else in the team. But Logan Forsythe, another guy struggling recently, but hitting lefties really well. John Danks, love him or hate him, you probably hate him. He's $2,800 on FanDuel, $3,200 on DraftKings. I think he's a really nice tournament option as well. Cheap options, not a whole lot to love here at second base. I know a guy that you targeted sometimes against lefties. He's $2,000 still on DraftKings. He's Jake Elmore. Is certainly a guy, if you're really just punting the position, just hope he gets yourself a hit. I mean, John Dank's one of the worst pitchers on the board tonight. One of the worst pitchers in the world, if you ask me. So certainly anyone is in play against him that's in the lineup. Third base here, I love Josh Donaldson. He's really expensive, $5,200 on DraftKings, $5,000 on FanDuel. We mentioned terrible splits for Joe Kelly. Maybe he needs to get new goggles. I don't know. Something needs to happen for him against righties. He's been absolutely terrible. I'll be looking that way quite a bit. And then, of course, Evan Longoria, once again on Friday, way too cheap against lefty. $3,800 on DraftKings and $3,100 on FanDuel.
Yeah, that's a good one, too. I feel pretty good about that one. He's in my temporary GPP lineup right now that I built before the show. I just try to pick out my favorite guys, and he's one of them right now.
Yeah, another guy who crushes lefties at third base, Trevor Plouffe, $2,700 on FanDuel, $42 on DraftKings. I mean, take advantage of some of these platoon guys tonight because a lot of them, like these two especially, really cheap, much cheaper than they rightfully should be in these matchups, if you ask me. So those are a couple guys I'm looking at. And if you want a really cheap guy, just shooting for the moon against Felix Hernandez, Luis Valbuena doesn't do much other than hit home runs, strikes out a ton. Maybe gets a hold of one if Felix makes a mistake. $2,300 on FanDuel, $29 on DraftKings, I think is your ultimate low-owned tournament play in the middle infield there.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably the two guys I'm going to be looking most at are Plouffe and Evan Longoria in GPPs. Those are the two guys I'm going to stick to for the most part. If I'm paying above that $3,800 that Longoria is at on DraftKings, I believe $3,200 he's at on FanDuel. Is that right?
31.
$3,100. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I like those. I mentioned Rendon on DraftKings at third base. He's third base only on FanDuel. He's a little bit too pricey for me there, but I might mix him in a little bit. Not a lot else I'm loving at third base. Arenado's too expensive for me right now at Miami. That's too big of a park for me, even though it's a pretty weak righty and he's been hot. I wish I could play Todd Frazier today, kind of, but that's the early game, so unless I play some all-day games, probably won't have him too much. No one else I'm really loving at third base, though. Nothing super cheap that I feel great about.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Moving on to shortstop, this is DraftKings only, of course, because he's not really a shortstop. But Hanley Ramirez gets Drew Hutchison tonight. We know he's better against lefties, but Drew Hutchison, one of these guys with big-time reverse splits this season, 372 WOBA allowed to righties. So I'm looking at him on DraftKings. You wish you could play him on FanDuel, but then I'm going to get to my favorite tournament option. Of course, I like Jose Reyes, but he's going to be a popular play, I think. Ian Desmond, $2,800 on FanDuel, $37 on DraftKings. Mike Fiers, as we know, Fiers, I'm not even sure how it's said, but either way, has big-time struggles giving up home runs, always has. I'm sure he always will, and Desmond has been struggling, so I should keep his ownership really low tonight. Yeah,
I like that as like a alternate stack, too. I mean, I've already mentioned how much I like Rendon today as a GPP play. Desmond's a good one. I mean, obviously, Bryce Harper's never a bad guy to include in a stack. So, I mean, I think the Washington offense as a whole is pretty interesting. It's going to be pretty cheap without Zimmerman in there, too. So, that's a stack you can use with a really nice pitching complement too. So that's going to be one that I probably run out quite a bit in GPPs today.
Yeah, I'm with you there, and even throw in Denard Span to that. 6 hits in his last
Yeah.
2 games. I mean, he's more of a cash game play, but certainly if you're putting in that stack, you got to get Denard Span in there at the top as
Yep,
well.
definitely. That's a good call there. I like that stack quite a bit. It's probably one of my 3 or 4 favorite ones today. There's a couple good ones, a couple more obvious ones. That's more of a GPP stack for me as far as like trying to actually win a tournament. So I like that one quite a bit. Another guy I'm really upset is in that early game is Avonda Jesus is still only 2,300 on DraftKings. I've been playing him almost every day lately.
Yep, I know, and it's been a nice run with him recently. I mean, he's been hitting well, and he's batting second in that early game, looks like. But yeah, unless you're in those all day, unfortunately, you can't play him. But definitely keep your eye on him as you're looking, because he's still really cheap, and especially as long as Brandon Phillips is out, he's going to be a nice value.
Yeah, a really cheap guy that you can also use at third base, but I think he's much more useful at shortstop is Willie Bloomquist today against a lefty. If he's in the lineup for Seattle, he's got shortstop and third base eligibility on DraftKings. 2,100 on DraftKings is a steal if he's, anywhere in the lineup, basically.
I think he led off last time against the lefty, didn't he?
He hit second last time against the lefty, and he's hit eighth a couple times since then against righties. But I think against a lefty, he might hit high in the order again because Cano, all those guys, as far as lefties go on Seattle, have just been doing nothing against lefties. So they've been trying to mix up the order a little bit there. So if he's for some reason hitting second in the order, I'm probably just going to lock him in at shortstop in a ton of lineups.
Yeah, and rightfully so. I mean, he's in a good spot. Next up, outfield. We don't even tell you about these top guys. Everyone knows Harper, Trout, Stanton, all those guys certainly in play for you. I think a really interesting option tonight, Yasiel Puig, $4,300 against Odrisamer de Spain. That's his DraftKings price. He's nice and cheap on FanDuel, or not cheap on FanDuel at $4,400. He's the guy that I'm going to be looking at. I think the Dodgers are an interesting stack there because it's a 6-run total. No one's going to stack him. Despain's been okay, but he's still a guy who pitches to contact, and I think that a lot of these bats for the Dodgers could punish him pretty quickly tonight.
Yeah, hard to argue with that. Lots of outfielders I feel pretty good about today. Even some cheap ones. I mentioned I like Harper already quite a bit. He's probably my top option, I would say. No one else really sticks out a ton to me in that regard as far as like guys I'm really just trying to put in my lineup no matter what their price is. You can like Trout today against Chavez. You can like Bautista against Kelly. It's really hard to argue with any of these guys at the top, but I think Harper is the guy that I'm trying to fit in as much as I can.
Yeah, I don't blame you there. And then the whole Pittsburgh outfield, we don't need to give you the whole breakdown, but Kevin Correa making his first start, I believe, since 2013.
Yep.
It's been a while for him, and he wasn't particularly good at that time either. Contact pitcher. All these guys can hit home runs. All of them can steal bases. Pittsburgh's going to be an interesting stack tonight as well, but that's not going to be a very sneaky one, so I don't think that's going to be one that's going to set you apart very much either. Some other options. Andre Ethier is really cheap on both sites if he's in the lineup tonight for the Dodgers. I like that as well. All the Detroit outfield bats, the big bats especially, Yoenis Cespedes and J.D. Martinez in play. You could throw Anthony Goes in there if you like. He's been terrible recently. He's really cheap. I guess if you're going to go full-blown stack, especially DraftKings, you might throw him in there as well. But not a guy that I'm actually particularly in love with here, though.
No, really hard to love him. There's not a lot in this mid-range of the outfield that you can feel really good about. It's like I'm probably trying to stick to the top there, all those guys we mentioned. Otherwise, I'm probably going to go really cheap here. And, there's a decent amount of outfield options that are pretty cheap. Jake Elmore's a guy I've been playing quite a bit for Tampa Bay. He's flat 2,000 against John Danks, who is averaging about 4 2/3 innings pitched per game outside of that one complete game he had against Houston. So he's a guy that's been lit up quite a bit this year. Ryan Rayburn, I don't mind it, despite the fact that it's Price. He's been crushing lefties all year. He's only 2,500, so the fact that he's facing Price is definitely built into that DraftKings discount. He's a little bit tougher to use on FanDuel, where there's a lot more near-min options. Yeah. Because, he's usually priced at 2,200 against every lefty, basically, or 2,100 or whatever he's been at on FanDuel lately. But I like 2,500 quite a bit on DraftKings. We talked about it before. Being near 2,000 is a lot more valuable on DraftKings than it is on FanDuel, where you can get some pretty good players on FanDuel in the high 2,000s. Yeah. Another guy that fits in that Washington stack, if he's in the lineup today, Tyler Moore, is a guy that was getting played a lot about a week and a half ago. He's only 2,300. We mentioned Fires is a guy that gives up quite a few home runs. He's another really cheap option I like. A couple more that I think are pretty interesting options today. John Mayberry is 2,200 against a lefty in Wood. Obviously, Wood's a pretty good pitcher, but 2,200 for a guy with some power upside that's been hitting sixth in the lineup against lefties. And then Shane Robinson is my last one that I'm looking at pretty heavily. Is 2,400 against a lefty in Rodriguez, and he's hit lefties really well for Minnesota over the last month or so here.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then I'll throw out a couple more guys here as well. Michael Kadire is cheap on both sites. Gets that lefty. He's been hitting lefties pretty well. And then Billy Burns, if you look for that strikeout, or not strikeout, well, maybe strikeout upside, but stolen base upside, especially on DraftKings where it's so heavily weighted. And with that, that's going to wrap things up. Find us on Twitter at DF Cafe. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out all of our great new tools, projections, cheat sheets, everything you could imagine at dailyfantasycafe.com for DraftKings and FanDuel. And we'll see you guys next time.